Welcome to the Spacedojo show. I'm your host, Josh Owens, and today we have a special guest with us, Michael. Actually, how do you say your last name, Michael? I'm terrible with last names.
Michel Weststrate.
Weststrate. Okay, awesome. Michel? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
That's like the French name.
Yeah, nice. Awesome. So you actually put out a project called Mobx, and that's what I wanted to talk about today. Can you tell me a little bit about Mobx and what it is?
Sure. So Mobx, in essence, is a reactive programming library, but that sounds more academical than it actually is. What it allows you to do is to decorate objects and say, hey, this is data which forms the state of my application. And then it delivers you a system which can derive all other things which are important in your application from that state. So like the UI, like sending messages around, making network requests, those kind of things.
Okay, and so this is maybe analogous to something like Redux, or no?
Actually, it takes quite a different take on state management. Usually I just relate it to like spreadsheets. So you have some data and you have a lot of formulas. An interesting question is when do these formulas need to update? And so it actually focuses on another part of state management, not that much on how do you change the state, how do you control that, which is what Redux does, but it's more of given a state, how can you make sure that the rest of your application is consistent with it?
I see. Yeah, so I come from a Meteor background, and so we have in Meteor land Minimongo and PubSub, and then we have a library called Tracker, which kind of keeps track of the state, right? The cached Minimongo stuff. And anytime one of those reactive data sources change, it kind of it forces a recomputation and re-rendering. So like how much is Mobx handling of that kind of flow? Like, let's say, I mean, how are people typically building a Mobx app, I guess, is what I'm asking. Like, where are their data sources coming from, and what does that look like?
Yeah, so what Mobx actually is inspired a lot by Tracker. What it does is actually quite similar. Tracker coins the term transparent reactive programming, and that is what Mobx does as well. The difference is that Tracker is very much coupled to a framework like a Meteor, and it's geared towards updating the UI and connecting that to your data sources. While Mobx took a more generic approach, which is basically more like I have some state and I have something which derives from it. And it might be UI, it might be something entirely different. And so I did a lot of research about how people are using Tracker, Meteor, how they use Knockout, and what issues they run into. And it seems that a lot of issues were caused by the fact that what Tracker does is not always predictable, or that's how it appears to people. And so there's some fundamental differences which Mobx takes, like making sure that everything that is derived from the state is updated synchronously. And then from that point on, it doesn't matter anymore whether it's UI you update or random other system calls. And so to get back to the question, how people use it is that they often define a store or which contains models, and those things are observable. And from that, Mobx is usually mostly used in combination with React. So there are React components that use these observables, and then Mobx makes sure that those components are updated in time. And from the other side of things, most server calls are made using the classic REST libraries like Super Agent or Axios. And in response to those server calls, people just update their models, and Mobx takes it from there. So either how you update your state and what you drive from it is not of much concern to Mobx. So it's like more of a small piece instead of providing the full stack.
Okay. So what drove you to write Mobx?
We, I think roughly a year ago, we started this Greenfield project. And that was actually a new project, but we knew the domain it needed to handle very well, because it was actually the migration of a desktop application to the web. And the domain we needed to handle was very complex. To give a rough idea, it has about 500 different classes describing the domain. I think the typings alone are like 10,000 lines of code just describing which attributes there all are. So the question I started with was, what is the code I actually want to write, and what is the code I want the system to create for me, so to say. So I started with pen and paper, and I liked React at the time, so I started writing React components. And I just had things like, okay, I want this component to render this attribute, and maybe there are some associations in between. Maybe it looks deep into a object, but I still want to just write this. And I'm not interested in subscribing to data or figuring what needs to update when, because, well, if your domain is that big, that becomes really tedious. So, and basically I took it from there, and I figured that the thing came the closest were systems like Meteor and Knockout, which also handle the tracking mostly transparently, so that people don't have to subscribe to the data sources and have to change that whenever their component changes. So that's basically how it all started.
Nice. And so you guys use Mobx in production then?
Yeah.
Can you tell me more about like where you work and I guess the app that you guys are building?
Yeah, so I work at a company called Mendix. We have our headquarters in Boston, but our research and development area office is actually in Rotterdam, in the Netherlands. And so what we are building is an application studio, a kind of an IDE, but mainly focused on consultancy firms. So they use our software to build and design applications, often for insurance companies or banks or governments. So like really enterprise stuff. But to build those applications, we offer a standardized cloud hosting solution and a development studio in which you can visually edit most things of your applications, like the form, the data model, the business rules. And so we have a decade-old studio for that, which was basically a C# studio, which is still in use. But we're also now making a web version of that same thing.
I see. Okay. So I'm just kind of like I'm looking over the docs as we're talking here for Mobx. It looks like you're actually using decorators. Is that required here?
No, that's entirely optional. And I use decorators because it makes very clear the mindset which you need to have when using Mobx. So with decorators, you can clearly mark this is state, these are actions, and these are things that are derived from state. Mm-hmm. So I use it in examples a lot because it makes it really clean and boils it down to the essence. But you can use it in plain ES5 environments as well. Every decorator has a normal function alternative to do the same thing.
Yeah. Nice. So you changed the name from I guess Mobservable.
Yeah, that's correct.
Mobx. Can you talk more about like that name change and why you did it?
Yeah, so Mobservable back at the time started like with the problem I just described, and I hacked something together in a weekend, and then we started using it and started improving it, and we were quite satisfied. And actually, when visiting a few conferences, I was like, "Hey, how those people are handling state management in React applications? We have something that is way easier to use and I think more scalable as well." So I figured at the time it should be open sourced and shared with the community. So that's what I did. But then I discovered that observable sounds a bit of scary. The name suggests that it's like the observable objects proposal, which has been cancelled. And it actually took some ideas from there. But it set people on the wrong foot because it's actually a reactive programming library. So that's why I put in the X at the end and shortened the name so that it was also recognizable for existing users.
Cool. So I'm kind of curious, like hearing you talk, and you said you were inspired by like Meteor and Vue and Knockout and those kinds of things. Like, why build a library rather than just use one of these kind of existing frameworks or setups?
Yeah, that's basically there are several reasons for that. First of all, we knew that it was a very long-running project, and we wanted to didn't want to go in full on a single framework, because usually if you are able to fit everything within the rules of the framework, it's fine. But as soon as you want to optimize a specific part, then you are often stuck. For example, we did a lot with Dojo in the past, and it's really hard to migrate from such an opinionated framework. So we already figured that we wanted to use React because that's just an abstraction on the view layer, for example. Then the issue with Knockout and Meteor, also Backbone, is that those reactive algorithms are specifically written to work with the rest of the framework, but it's hard to use them outside. For example, you also use Mobx on server sides for things. We have partners using our SDKs, which are powered by Mobx, in entirely different architectures. And having a library that just does the reactive thing without all the rest gave us that flexibility.
I see. Yeah. So lately I've been thinking that libraries tend to be, sometimes they take more time to integrate, but maybe at the end of the day, like they move quicker and they solve the problems slightly better than I think opinionated frameworks can. And that's just, I think maybe that's my experience, like coming from Meteor and feeling like we're locked into components that aren't necessarily being updated very often, right? Like they went from a team of like 8 or 9 people to like 1. I'm kind of curious, like, what's the community look like around Mobx? Are you getting like a lot of submissions, and like how much time are you spending on like updating and maintaining it and that?
Lately, a lot actually, because the interest is still growing. There are some, I think, 3 or 4 core committers other than me. And so yesterday I released a new version of Mobx. And actually that's another guy, I think, rewrote roughly the half of the core algorithm. by his own. So that was really cool to see that somebody else entirely crocked the code base, saw room for improvements, and wrote really smart optimizations inside it, which I didn't think of, and actually improved the semantics a bit as well. So what I saw is quite funny that the user base grows with roughly the same rate as people committing to it.
Oh, okay, nice. Yeah, I usually I've got a little calculation I run. I just take the number of commits and divide it out by the number of contributors, and it looks like you're at about a 24 average, which is pretty good. I think the projects that don't really encourage community start to get upwards of 50 or 100, and the ones that are like really good at embracing a large community get down to like 10 or 9. Like React, I think, is at like 9.5 commits per contributor. So that seems pretty
cool. Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah. So do you get a lot of pull requests? I mean, how much time do you think you're spending per week on Mobx?
I think lately 3 evenings and some commute time when I travel to my work. Yeah, something like that, I think. But it's a bit. I actually don't spend that much time on contributing to the thing itself or on bug fixing. That's quite okay. I think most of my time goes into preparing talks, answering questions, improving documentation. I noticed, for example, that whenever I hear the same question for the second or third time, I really have to put in the effort to write the question and the answer down somewhere in documentation to keep it scalable. And actually what I see is often I get a lot of similar questions, and then I take the effort to write it down, and then that question disappears from being asked directly at a GitHub channel or something like that. So that really pays off.
Awesome. Actually, I'm seeing here also you've got like an egghead tutorial. It looks like maybe 15-20 minutes of video.
Yeah. It's I think it's almost exactly half an hour indeed.
Half an hour. Nice.
And it covers all the basics of Mobx. After that, you should be able to build pretty serious Mobx applications.
That's awesome.
And there are also recently there were some tutorials released by Code Academy. No, Learn Code Academy, I think they are called.
Yeah.
And they also did a pretty nice job of showing the essence in I think about 10 minutes or something.
Yeah. It says 12 minutes here in the docs. That's nice.
Yeah, actually, I'm pretty amazed usually how quickly people are able to pick up things. I hear people that are using Mobx saying things like, well, I explained it to one of my coworkers and he was up and running with his first components in 10 minutes. And I think that is because it's what you need to do with Mobx is very close to the mental application you have of your application. I think it puts more effort than most frameworks in focusing on what is the essential complexity of your application and taking care of all the rest. And I think that's the goal of probably every framework, but it feels like it is working, what I hear from people.
Yeah. I mean, it seems pretty nice, and like honestly, it feels pretty familiar to me. Like just looking at the code and like seeing the auto run, it's not really something that people use a ton. Like Tracker behind the scenes does a lot of the auto run for you in Meteor land, and a lot of people like. I teach an 8-hour course that shows people like all the parts of Meteor, and one of the things like we just touch on for a few minutes is auto run, and it's like it's definitely I think, a foreign concept when people first see it. Like, what do you mean? Like, it's gonna rerun when anything changes? Like, that's weird. But I think it's super helpful. And so,
Yeah, I usually explain that that's like the core of Mobx is 4 functions. The first one is observable. That makes data observable. The second one is observer, which you use on React components, and which kind of wraps the render function of a component in Autorun. That's basically what happens behind the scenes.
yeah.
And then you have you have also Autorun and computed. And basically they do the same thing. They derive something from the state. The difference is that computers always derives a value, and Autorun makes sure that some side effect happens.
Yeah.
So, and people should mainly stick to producing values. It's a thing you can reason simply about. It's like formulas in Excel.
Mm-hmm.
But at some point, you have to bridge to imperative programming to make a network request or to flush something to the DOM. And that's when Autorun comes in. But ideally, you have a framework that takes care of most of the Autoruns you would ever need.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely like I'm looking at this. So for the most part, like by using Mobx and React, you're able to kind of take advantage of the fact that React is using the virtual DOM, and like it's only gonna put out the pieces that change, right? So when you're looking at using some of observable data, it should be like very tiny changes are coming through, which I think um, is different in Meteor Land. Like we tend to rerun a lot of code that doesn't necessarily have to be run because auto runs like there everywhere, kind of hidden behind the scenes. So it's kind of nice that it seems like it's not that way with Mobx.
Yeah, Mobx takes it a level further in analyzing what should be rerun. It's basically because there's this distinction between orderance and computed values. Computed values are like, well, they're values. So even if a computed value needed to recompute, but its output didn't change, then it knows the rest of the derivation tree can be skipped. And it orders the derivation tree automatically for you so that things that are needed early in the chain are computed first so that they're not computed accidentally twice.
Mm. Yeah, that's pretty slick. So if people wanted to like get started with Mobx, like where should they go?
I think if you like learning from videos, just follow the Egghead course.
Mm-hmm.
I think with the first lesson already, you know enough to build something very basic and experiment with it, and then watch the rest of the lessons to learn more about what is actually happening. And on the README, there are quite some fiddles you can fork and then change. There are some boilerplate projects, both official ones and more advanced boilerplates submitted by other people. And they're all listed in the examples section, I think, on the homepage.
Hey there, just wanted to take a quick second to tell you about something that's coming up in November, Space Camp 2.0. So last year we ran Space Camp 1.0 in Gatlinburg, Tennessee in the mountains. It was a lot of fun. And so this year we decided we wanted to go bigger. And it took some searching, but we found an even bigger place. It has 30 bedrooms, and it's on the coast of North Carolina in Outer Banks. Super, super excited for this. We're going to follow a similar format to last year. So the first day, we're going to have talks, and it's going to be kind of the open camp style of like, everyone just kind of saying, hey, I've got a talk, and we'll pick the best ones, and then we'll all sit down and listen to those. They were great last year. I'm expecting some top-notch ones again this year. We also have like home cooked meals the entire time. My wife is an excellent excellent cook, and she's going to make all those meals. And I think anyone that went last year would attest to how tasty everything was and how much food there was. And it was amazing. And we plan to replicate that this year. And, you know, talks during the day, then in the evenings, beer, board games, a lot of hanging out, talking, watching funny videos, all kinds of stuff. So if board games are your thing, this is definitely the event to come to. I may even try to bring the PS4 or something. We'll see how that works out. The car was pretty packed last year, so I don't know how much space there will be. But if you're interested, it's like November. It's like the first week in November, right after the election. So that weekend, the second day, we'll have a hackathon contest where we'll be building fun things using JavaScript. So if you're a fan of JavaScript, like, this is the event you want to be at. So check it out, camp.spacedojo.com. It will be an amazing time, I promise you. See you there. And then there's mobx.js.github.io as well, right?
Exactly.
That's the homepage you were talking about?
Yeah, that's the homepage.
Nice. So we talked a little bit about like Redux versus Mobx, and like looking over these docs, it's clear to me that like Mobx is just a smaller piece of like managing that state, like you mentioned, whereas Redux is maybe a little bit bigger, right? It's like a store, and it's founded on the idea of like immutable data, whereas it's not. That's not the case with Mobx, right? Like it's mutable data, right?
Yeah, it's immutable data. I mean, you can use pieces of immutable data, but you benefit best from using mutable data. And there are a few reasons for that. The first one is it's easier to optimize. People generally claim a lot better performance when using Mobx out of the box than when using Redux. And that's basically because the changes that are applied are a lot smaller. It's like you either mutate all of your state or you mutate a small piece of it. That was the first thing. What was the question again?
I guess just the kind of the differences between Redux and Mobx is what I was driving at. Seems like Redux is a bigger thing.
Yeah, so it's people often compare it's like using automatic gear or manual gearing. But I think I like Redux a lot because of the purity of the abstraction, and it's more fun to tinker about than Mobx actually, which is kind of old-fashioned code what you write. But then when it comes to learning and writing code, I think Mobx is easier because it's more close to the mental model you have of your data. So if you have a user which is related to a message, then you can just link the user to the message and Mobx will take care of the rest. And then, in contrast, when you use immutable data, you have to work with a kind of foreign references because there's no so that feels more awkward, I think, in practice to use. I mean, it's like you are doing the work which the program can do for you. Something like that.
Yeah. So I'm curious, like, have you looked at anything like Apollo or other kind of data loading libraries, I guess, right? Like Apollo uses GraphQL and it creates a Redux store and like pushes the GraphQL data into the store, and then you can pass that along and use it within a React application. Have you seen any other kind of Mobx related data loading libraries that makes it super easy to just say like, I'm going to drop this in, here's how I'm going to pull my data over, and then I don't have to worry about it anymore. Like I can just say, observer on my React component, and like everything works like it should.
I think there's not something out of box which abstracted as high as those things. On the other hand, because Mobx is not very opinionated, it's very easy to integrate it. Recently, there was an issue on the Apollo client. Somebody wanted to integrate Mobx with Apollo client.
Mm-hmm.
And so I looked at the docs of the Apollo clients and wrote a very simple wrapper, I think in 15 lines of code, that turns a, how do you call them? A watch query, an Apollo client into an observable. Because Mobx has, like Decker actually, this notion of generic observables where you just need some lifecycle hooks to be hooked up, like please notify the rest of the system that this observable changed, those kind of things.
Yeah.
And the other way around, that their subscriptions are cleaned up when needed.
Nice. That's pretty awesome, actually. I'll have to give that a look. I've just started to dabble a little into Apollo. I try to learn something new every week to keep current. I don't know if one new thing a week really keeps you current in JavaScript, but
I think it should be okay. I tried to do the same until I started open sourcing Mobx, and then I hadn't any time anymore for that.
Yes, exactly. Like open source takes time. It's crazy. I don't open source a lot of libraries anymore just because it's like I don't think I have time for all that. I don't know. Like it's definitely. I think you're right. Like when you said earlier, you spend a lot more time on like documentation and facts and stuff. Like I think that's the hallmark of a good, strong open source project is really good, strong documentation. For sure.
Yeah, I found that's actually the hardest thing to do, writing good documentation. But people are generally quite satisfied with it, so it's going well, I guess. And I get a lot of pull requests on documentation, so that's really helpful.
Nice. Yeah, that is awesome. Don't see that a whole lot usually. All right. Well, I think that was everything I had. I just want to say thank you, Michel, for coming on the show. Really appreciate it. And if people want to find you, where can they go to find you?
So there's the Mobx GitHub channel. It's linked on the top of the README. They can follow me on Twitter, which is a difficult name. And then Weststrate, which is my. I suggest you just go to the GitHub page and then copy my name from the commit message, and then that's also my Twitter handle.
There's a link to your Twitter down at the very bottom of the Mobx documentation page, so that'll work too.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I should have picked a nice, funny Twitter name. But I didn't think of that 6 years ago, and then I didn't use Twitter for 4 years, and then...
It happens. All right. Well, thank you again for coming on the show. Really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you.
All right. Bye.
See ya.
This video has been a Spacedojo production. You can click the Learn More button to find out more about us at spacedojo.com. Or you can click the subscribe button to get notified about new videos we put out each week. Thanks for watching.